In this episode, Valletta's Vernacular, grids, gallerias, and piano's parliament. Welcome to Two Architects and a Lawyer. Join architect Luis de Miguel in Valencia and architect-lawyer William McLean in Vancouver for observations and commentary on all things design. Here are William and Luis.
Okay, Louis, we're here in an unusual location. We're on the island of Gozo, which many people will not have heard of, but it's adjacent to the island of Malta.
Oh. I don't get out much.
And we're together on this little holiday in an unusual place that neither of us have been to before. I thought it would be interesting to talk about our experiences with coming to new cities.
Yes.
How city planning affects the experience of being in a new place, and what our first perceptions are of Valletta, which is the capital of Malta, where we were until today. First of all, maybe talk about what you saw as you arrived, as I did, by plane the other day.
Well, I'll say the most important thing is find yourself a really good restaurant before you do anything else. And today we really hit the jackpot. The place called Coronation in this island called Gozo. And if you've never been here, frankly, worth the detour. So that being said, Malta is it's an unusual place for many reasons. Its existence has to do with piracy. It has to do with the fact that it's located in the Mediterranean. And the town itself is, you could say it's a city that was built by limestone, because there's nothing but limestone everywhere you look.
Well, that's the reason I was prompting you about the arrival by plane, because certainly my first impression, looking out the window, was astonishment at the uniformity of the city from one side to the other. A particular warm yellow color, which we soon found out was the building material here, and is the building material of every building on every street.
And not only on every street, every building, but every field is delineated, and every road is flanked by this stone. I mean, you become totally intoxicated with it.
One of the interesting things I've learned about Malta, Valletta in particular, the capital of Malta, is that it was one of the first European cities to be laid out on a grid basis. Mm-hmm. There had been a siege of Malta when it was a disorganized territory in the 1500s by the Turks, the Ottomans. The Pope was very concerned about this and sent an architect who was an assistant to Michelangelo to Malta with the instructions to lay out a city which was going to be capable of withstanding a future siege.
Well, I'll interject here. Of course, the archipelago of islands, of which Malta was the largest, belonged to the Kingdom of Aragon in Spain, and it was actually Charles I of Spain who ceded the ownership of the island to the Knights of St. John. And the reason being, yes, this constant threat from Turks to take over the island. So it really changed the history pretty much of the Mediterranean. And the layout of the city is Cartesian in nature. So regardless of what the topography is, you end up with these 90-degree streets.
That's right. Well, that was an innovation, and it was done for a couple of reasons. First of all, to allow rapid access from one side of the peninsula to the other to defenders of the city. Secondly, it was to take advantage of prevailing sea breezes to allow natural cooling to happen in this town, which is suffocatingly hot in the summertime. Mm-hmm. And thirdly, it was to allow convenient incorporation of water supply, sewerage systems, which are easiest to arrange in a grid system, of course. So the instructions to the local builders of the city were that they must respect this Cartesian system. They weren't allowed to have gardens in front of their villas, for example, because that would break the linearity of the street front. If they were going to build on a corner, they had to decorate the corner with either a niche, a sculpture, or some kind of special
usually
treatment.
it was cut at 45 degrees, so there weren't any sharp angles. Yeah.
Those rules were conformed with even by the nobility. The palaces that were built, which were called locally auberges, had to conform to those same rules. So even those come right out to the street front and create a uniform edge. So as a visitor, 500 years later, we're benefiting from the ease of movement in the city and that sense of order. Which
there are just a few plazas, squares within the city, very few compared to, say, any European, Spanish city, but there are some here. And in fact, the city itself, I think if the Ottomans had made it into the city, it was really bad news. When you look at Malta, you become very aware of the fortifications on the coast, which are mostly of a defensive naval nature. In other words, they were, the only way to get here, obviously, was by boat. So all the defenses were naval, and they used to have chains across short distances to prevent ships from coming in, and also most of the embankments. And like I say, all the fortifications have a slope to them, very reminiscent of naval defense. Other than that, so the object of all this was to keep enemies from entering the city. If they had entered the city, then it was really bad news.
Well, of course, those fortifications contribute to the pleasant experience we have of the city today, because it means that the city has a very precise edge, and it does not, like many North American cities, bleed out into some suburbia. There's a fortification which surrounds the entire peninsula of Valletta. But talking about town planning generally, we talked about our experience arriving here in Valletta, but of course Paris, Washington, those are two other cities which had a town planning imposed on them, in one case on an existing tangle of medieval streets, talking about Paris, and in Washington, an imposition of a plan which was to accomplish and to celebrate the grandeur of a new capital city. Other cities have...
Designed by a Frenchman, by the way, Le Nôtre. I forget his last
No, L'Enfant.
L'Enfant.
Pierre L'Enfant. And that happened prior, about 60 years before Haussmann's intervention in Paris.
Yes.
The reasons were quite different. The results are quite similar. And in some ways, I think...
Well, they were similar in the sense that it was a radial. The grid was stopped by radial angled streets. Most of it was all Cartesian, but there was
with diagonal imposed on that grid.
A sort of a Broadway, to quote an example that everybody knows. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously in Manhattan, the ultimate orthogonal street system, cut only by Broadway.
Mm-hmm. And then Paris, 60 years after L'Enfant's Washington, Haussmann, in a sense, did to Paris what L'Enfant had attempted to do in Washington. But let's move away from those two examples. All of us have the experience of arriving at new cities. Urban planners, which are responsible for cities, behave in ways that are similar to architects, but in other ways quite differently from architects. Yeah. And thinking about how those two professions interact is interesting.
Well, they produce what's called a master plan for development, which obviously all architects do is kind of follow the master plan, the master idea of how the city is organized. The thing here is that these islands are a bit like a hand. I mean, there's so many inlets. They're irregular, but like you say, they are all fortified, and the streets run very much parallel to the shore. And then what happens behind is, even though it's quite hilly here, which is surprising, because one would think that this island would be sort of flat, but it's not. It's actually quite hilly. And yes, they follow the same 90-degree angle. But I didn't see any major boulevards, apart from the one near the Parliament buildings that has a one street, Republic Street, that is quite wide. Mm-hmm. The rest of the streets are fairly narrow.
Well, you mentioned the Parliament buildings, and we'll look at some pictures of that complex, which was the result of an intervention by Renzo Piano, great master of very delicate intervention in the urban setting. What he did was very much a departure from what the original town planners
and also complete departure for him, because he was a very lattice type aluminum and glass type of open architecture. And here we're finding architecture absolutely solid, very, in a way, reminiscent of the defenses that we talked about, and done in the same stone that is native to this part of the world.
Yes, that part of it is identical. What's not conforming is the plainness of plane, plainness of the facades of the building. They are the more typical buildings that we see now in every major city, which are meant to be viewed from all sides. They exist in a freestanding way in the landscape.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, his decision to do that does not detract from the success of that project. It's a wonderful intervention, partly because of his respect for the materials,
yes,
but also because his understanding of how the manipulation of those rules allowed him to center one's attention on the very importance of the Parliament buildings themselves, which are meant to celebrate democracy, access, individuality.
But one thing comes to mind for one is that the sloping of the walls is reminiscent of the embankments and the defensive posts that occur on the coast. So he does have a few of those walls slanting at an angle. And the pattern of the stone, he sort of leaves a few empty spaces. And if you look at it carefully, you can actually see the geography of Malta. It's almost like looking at the plan of Malta right on the facade of the building.
Mm-hmm. And of course, those relief features, all crafted out of the local yellow soft limestone, create a brise soleil effect, which protects the heat gain, solar gain, to the spaces behind. And they also produce an incredibly satisfying effect as you move away from the building. You get one pleasant sensation from being close.
Yep.
You move back even many blocks away, and you get a different, equally wonderful feeling from looking at the building.
But it's very monumental. It's very, could I say, Parisian. Big avenue, I mean, it's a pedestrian street, but yet it evokes a bit of the Champs-Élysées flavor. Mm-hmm. And his building is sited right at the beginning of this whole enterprise.
Yes.
So it was a very successful intervention in my mind.
Yes. Well, of course, he did not only the Parliament buildings, but he worked on an entrance, a grand city gate, which was done with very minimal materials, but nevertheless,
and there's a bridge.
Yes.
You actually come over with this bridge, so you're kind of, I don't know, elevated to a podium area, which you don't get in Paris. You're on the same level. So we'd be remiss if we didn't mention these these lookouts in houses, because the two things that happen.
Yes.
One is there's limestone like to beat the band. It's, at last count, there are 80 quarries in Malta, all digging up this stuff. And so absolutely everything here, like I say, the roads, the buildings, everything is made with this limestone. And the other thing are these lookouts in houses, which are sort of bay windows, projecting maybe no more than, and with glass, they were all windows. And the idea of these things is that people would sit there and chat and be like in a cafe situation where they would just watch the world go by, literally, you know. So, and that is in every single building. And one nice thing that they did here, now I don't know whether it's because of zoning, probably, is that many buildings that are very low in height have been extended. And what the architect has done has set back the new part to kind of leave the streetscape the same and yet generate revenue for the owner. Mm-hmm. So the things are set back very elegantly and with a new facade, usually plain. When I say plain, I mean white, nothing, no stones, no, you know, there's no frivolity, there's no geometric play, there's no architectural gymnastics. It's all just plain as a day is long, which I think is extremely good and very controlled with the architects that have worked here.
Well, I think that goes to show in Valletta the wonderful synchronicity between the town planning and the architecture. They happen to work together.
And the clients, don't forget. The clients are all friends.
That wonderful symbiosis between those two professions isn't often played out in North American cities quite so well, where there's a great reluctance to necessarily follow the rules. There's a tendency to want to escape the rules.
Yes, of course. Because you want to shine. You want to stick out, literally and figuratively, from whatever's around you. You know.
But at the same time, just going back to Renzo Piano and what he did, he's doing what architects do, which is to create something. Once he is finished with his project, his expectation is, of course, to step away. His product either stands the ages or doesn't, but there's nothing intended to evolve. It's not designed from the beginning to turn into something else. It's designed to sit there like a book on a shelf. Yeah. The shelf itself is the thing that the urban planners have done.
Right.
And
that's very, very poetic.
Those rules. I mentioned that he flouted them slightly, but at the same time took advantage of the opportunities that were available to him to integrate with the surroundings.
Well, it's a modern building. I mean,
yes.
And he doesn't hide from that at all.
No.
And but I think that, you know, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention, in terms of urban planning, the fact that there are very few public plazas, very few public squares, and even less gardens or green space, really. I mean, the city is stone wall to wall, and I didn't see not a lot of vegetation here. I don't know if you felt the same.
Well, we're here in early spring. The weather is moderate, but we understand that it's severe in the summertime. But I think that, like many places, Valletta is suffering from an oversupply of tourists.
We're not discouraging people from coming, but don't expect, you know, Central Park or Le Bois de Boulogne or anything, you know, El Retiro de Madrid. There is no public green area in Valletta. There's garden. I mean, there's not gardening around. There's agricultural land around.
What I was going to say, the space within the fortifications is very limited, so there isn't a lot of room to allow that kind of expression. But what there are some very touching memorials to the many sieges, battles, not the least of which was what happened in World War II when this was the most
Yeah,
bombed
it's
territory.
just, all I'm saying is they could have planted a tree or two. That's all.
Well, Louis, I'm going to suggest we cut it at that.
I tell you, do come to Malta. It's blown my mind.
All right. Great to have done this with you, and we'll see you again next time. I think it'll be probably online, but we'll try to do this again.
It's wonderful to be in the same room, really, the same space.
A special thank you to our camera lady today. Thank you, Catherine.